Well, hello again, everyone. For those of you joining us just new for the first time, welcome. For those of you who were with us earlier today, welcome back. Really excited to get into the final block of programming for today's Women Lead Here event. So next in our programming, we have just a little bit of a different format. Our next 5 speakers are really incredible, and I can't wait till you hear what they have to say. They're all going to present a brief kind of a mini talk on a key idea or concept that provides a roadmap or a call to action for businesses to really accelerate their progress on gender parity, diversity, and inclusion. So just a little bit of a housekeeping so you know what's coming up. First of all, again, if you want to post to social media, please do. Hashtag is hashtag ROB Women Lead Here, all smushed together. Secondarily, following each of these 5 presentations, we're going to gather all the 5 speakers back together again, have a bit of a roundtable Q&A that I'll be moderating. But following that, there will be an opportunity to submit audience questions. You can do so by very, very cleverly clicking the Ask Question button on the bottom of your screen, and our moderators will table them in due course. So please think of questions as they're going, and hopefully we can have some great dialogue. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker for this session, Paulette Sr. Paulette is the president and CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation, an organization that has worked to move women and girls out of violence and poverty, while also advocating for inclusive leadership and female empowerment. Paulette joined the foundation in 2016 after serving 10 years as the CEO of YWCA Canada, and she has devoted her whole career to empowering women and girls to overcome barriers and reach their full potential. It's a true privilege to have Paulette here today. Her talk is called Resetting Normal Gender Parity in the Midst of a Pandemic and Beyond. So I'll turn it over to you, Paulette. Off to you.
Thank you, Deborah, and hello, everyone. It's really fantastic to take part in this exchange of ideas about boosting corporate inclusion. This is a critical discussion given the pandemic's impact on women's workforce participation, which, as we know, is now at its lowest point in 3 decades. Think about that for a moment. Decades of progress rolled back within months. As pandemics go, this one stands alone. Economic layoffs and cutbacks have fallen heavily on women, and most dramatically on women living on low incomes, who experience intersecting inequalities based on race, class, disability, education, and migration immigration status. Many working women are breaking under the increasing burden of childcare and education. It's staggering. A recent study or survey found that 1 in 3 women in Canada have considered quitting their jobs so that their children can attend child daycare or childcare, and time will tell what choices they'll face virtually. So they can attend virtually, and time will tell what choices they'll face should another lockdown come into effect. The implications for women's financial security and career advancement are grim. So today we're addressing what corporate Canada can do now about equity and inclusion. But given the scope of the situation, we must think bigger, beyond HR policies of individual organizations and beyond the women who already have the privilege of being on the corporate ladder. In fact, we need to address the many new obstacles diverse women are now facing to get on the ladder in the first place. If we rewind to before the pandemic hit, the unemployment rate for Black women, Indigenous, and other racialized women was roughly a range of twice the rate of non-racialized women. And these women have faced greater discrimination than other women to getting well-paid jobs. Recent events have really made it clear that the legacies of colonialism and anti-racism continue to permeate our institutions, our schools, our health systems, justice systems, and workplaces. In many cases, the pandemic is intensifying those inequities. So what we can do now is call on government policymakers for sweeping systemic change that addresses the intertwined issues of gender and racial inequality. It's time to reset normal and implement a pandemic recovery plan that centers all women. The Canadian Women's Foundation is releasing a series of resetting normal reports that provide a roadmap for doing just that. And a key area for reform is caregiving and the care economy. The health of Canada's economy depends on women's ability to fully participate. Childcare enables women to work. It is a significant source of employment and it lays a strong foundation for children's education. Yet Canada's childcare systems remain fragmented, with patchwork solutions across the country that do not reflect the value of this work and its necessity to our economy. Gendered and built-in systemic biases, along with immigration policies, underpin who performs care work. The roles of caregivers, whether they're daycare providers or personal support workers in long-term care homes, have been chronically undervalued and underpaid. And now we're experiencing the consequences in many ways. Transformative policies that support both paid and unpaid caring labor will be crucial to stopping the looming erosion of women's economic and social progress and rights. If this sounds like a daunting challenge, the good news is that you have to take action on this very easily, where you are paying valuable time and attention to examining and possibly transforming unhelpful practices that we have accepted as normal. And we have an easy task for you that only takes a few minutes. On our website, canadianwoman.org/resettingnormal, you can sign a letter to urge your government representatives to put gender equality at the center of post-pandemic rebuilding plans. If all of us here today take a few moments to sign the letter and share it, we can actually amplify this urgent call to help women of all backgrounds on the path to work and financial recovery, and just in time for the upcoming throne speech and ahead of the budget. So again, the link is canadianwoman.org/resettingnormal. Thank you all in advance for taking this step to support equity and inclusion, and I look forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Paulette. That is wonderful. I've already written down that website, and we can likely share that too in the notes after we have this event. That's wonderful and important to all have our say at this time. On to our next speed presentation to Caroline Coetzee. Caroline is the founder and chief equality officer of the organization Women in Governance, which she created in 2010. Women in Governance is a not-for-profit that supports women in leadership development, career advancement, and access to corporate board seats. Caroline is an internationally renowned speaker on this topic. She spoke to Nassau earlier this week. She does a lot of talks, and we're very, very grateful to have her on our agenda today. Her talk today is entitled Progress, Not Perfection, a sentiment I can definitely get behind. So please welcome Caroline Coetzee. Oh, Caroline, I believe you're on mute.
Here we are. Sorry about that. Thank you, Deborah. It's an honor to be here today and happy to be amongst these illustrious colleagues today. So as the positive impact of gender diversity on financial performance, on innovation, on branding, on employee engagement, is increasingly recognized by organizations, more and more companies are working to close the gender gap so that they may benefit from the advantages brought by an equal representation of men and women at every level of the organization. But to aspire to close a gap, you must first understand its root causes and its magnitude. At Women in Governance, we have found that many companies are unable to accurately identify problems or come up with solutions because they don't clearly measure diversity among their employees. Right before the pandemic, it seemed to us that we had reached greater heights when it comes to gender equality. But the reality is progress was actually stagnating since 2014. Sure, some indicators did improve, like the share of women in professional and technical jobs or in political representation. But overall, however, gender equality in work continued to lag behind gender equality in society. According to a Harvard Business Review, women's jobs are 1.8 times more vulnerable to the crisis than men's jobs, Women make up 39% of global employment, but account for 54% of overall job losses. We've also seen how women's plates got fuller more than ever due to COVID-19, managing their careers, and their disproportionate share, double, sometimes triple, of house chores and homeschooling. Women do an average of 75% of the world's total unpaid care work. As a result, women have dropped out of the workforce at a higher rate than explained by simple labor market dynamics. Luckily for the younger generation, though, fathers are much more involved in taking care of their children, but it seems they're still not doing the dishes, though. The main reason why we have to reach gender equality is not out of fairness to women, who are 51% of the population, who are 60% of university graduates, and more than 80% of buying decision-making, but really for our businesses to thrive, as well as our economy and our society as a whole. Companies in the top quartile for gender diversity on executive teams were 25% more likely to have above average profitability than companies in the fourth quartiles. Companies that choose to reduce their focus on diversity and inclusion may not realize it yet, but they're actually placing themselves at a disadvantage by limiting their access to talent, diverse skills, leadership styles, and perspectives. Where any corporation should begin is by understanding their current position on the gender parity spectrum through an audit, such as the Women in Governance Parity Certification, for example. Built with the pro bono support of McKinsey and Company 4 years ago, the certification not only measures the presence of women in decision-making bodies, but also at every level of the organization's hierarchy to ensure that we are creating a pipeline of female talent. With our support, more than 65 major Canadian organizations have successfully increased the representation of women in sectors where they have historically been underrepresented, as well as in senior management positions. Our evaluation team is the most robust in North America and is further pro bono supported by a committee of 15 consultants from Mercer and Willis Towers Watson. We provide certified organizations with a report, thorough analytics, benchmarking, best practices to maintain sustainable actions and to progress towards higher levels of certification. In conclusion, we can all make a difference and demand gender parity not only from our own organization, but our supply chain and business partners as well. At Women in Governance, we actually signed a historic partnership with the Girl Scouts of the USA last year. They are a $1.2 billion organization headquartered in New York, and they decided to use what they call the power of the purse to align their vendors to their values by asking them to enroll in our parity certification. And that's more than 10,000 vendors across the USA. So a few concrete things that can be done by companies tomorrow morning. I know, Deborah, you will be asking these questions of us very shortly, but I just want to share a few things on what we can do to progress, especially in times of pandemic. Measure job losses and requests for leave. Are they coming more from women than from men? Measure the promotion rates. Are we giving them more to men than to women? Is there slippage? Is our recruiting still gender balanced? Companies need also to show that they care for the health and mental well-being of women employees who have been having difficulties setting boundaries between their work and their home life. It's especially difficult when you're working from home. It's also essential to define, articulate, and report back in all transparency on your targets relative to gender parity. You must ensure that you have internal structure that is bias-free and supports women from underrepresented populations. Forget fit. Diversity will bring positive disruption. Focus on inclusion. And don't hesitate to give disproportionate visibility to women and members of underrepresented groups on your internal and external platforms. Tackle unconscious bias and build a pool of male champions who will stand behind the idea that the larger number of women at work is in everyone's interest. What we're looking for is progress, not perfection. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Caroline. That's a lot of information in a very, very digestible way. I really appreciate it. Our third speaker in this round is Louise Taylor-Green, who we're delighted to have here. Louise is the CEO of the Human Resources Professionals Association. If you're not familiar with the HRPA, it governs and regulates the professional HR practices of more than 24,000 registered members across Canada. Louise is here today to talk about an incredibly important thing, which is the role of HR in building high diversity companies. None of this will happen unless the people are actively on board and building these changes. So I'm so excited to hear what you have to say. Louise, over to you.
Thanks so much, Deborah, and it's such a privilege to be here and be part of the conversation today. And in the company of so many accomplished leaders, I'm just wowed with what I've seen and heard today. I personally am a pretty reflective person, and in preparing for today, I looked back on my own career journey and sort of held up the mirror to my own white privilege. And even though I, like a lot of other women in leadership roles, have faced a lot of barriers in my career, I have never walked a mile in a systemically disadvantaged person's shoes. But I do know what it is like to be subject to sexual harassment, discrimination, and bias, as well as the challenges of being overlooked when competing with men for executive and board roles. And sometimes those men are even less qualified than I have been. That said, my personal mantra has always been, don't be bitter, just get better. And that has carried me through a number of professional disappointments in my career. If we look at the 2020 annual Rosenzweig report, which reports on Canada's 100 largest public companies, of the 538 NEOs, only 8% were women. That's a backslide from 2019 when it was 10%. That should be deeply alarming to all of us. My view is that gender parity is a person's issue, not just a woman's issue. And it will take men and women, all of us who are in decision-making roles with the power to affect policy change, to really drive this change agenda together. And we've got to have concrete action now. There's that old saying, what was the best time to plant a tree? Well, it was 20 years ago. I am personally an advocate for the measurement and mandatory reporting and target setting of equity and inclusion metrics. And no matter what side of the policy fence you sit on, whether you prefer moral suasion to statutory reporting, no one can argue the point we need to do better now. Over the last 24 years, I've parachuted in and out of HR, and there are so many misconceptions and misperceptions about the HR profession. But HR professionals really know how to optimize human capital in organizations. I don't think there's ever been a time when companies have needed their HR function more. And chief HR officers have truly been at the forefront of organizational transformation through economic upheaval, Me Too, mental health awareness, anti-Black racism, equity for BIPOC community, and most certainly have been driving their organizations forward through COVID-19. So if you really think about enabling your organization's function to deliver inclusive, gender-balanced workplaces, the work of HR is just beginning. The work to design talent programs should be grounded in a policy edict from the top. We need CEOs and boards to make it a priority. If they don't, we'll continue to limp along or backslide. You simply cannot achieve gender parity in the C-suite or on boards if you don't have a diverse talent pipeline to feed it. So achieving gender parity or increasing gender parity is not a problem of gravity. It is a problem of policy and choice. 3 major actions that HR leaders can take starting now. Number 1, start with policy. Make it a requirement to measure and report your workforce and board demographics and be transparent about your results to your shareholders and stakeholders. Also, look at your people practices and ensure that they don't unintentionally exclude certain populations or create barriers to full participation in your workplace. I'd also encourage you to segment and analyze your engagement data, your exit interviews, your talent data amongst racialized groups to uncover the greatest areas of unconscious inequity or gender imbalance. Number 2, change your talent practices. Of course, there's an enormous opportunity to change your people practices throughout the entire employment life cycle, but I would start with an objective evaluation of your talent acquisition practices. Look at the way your company hires. If you evaluate it objectively, I guarantee you there will be opportunities to remove barriers to increasing opportunities for women, people with disabilities, Aboriginal Canadians, and visible minorities. I also suggest including a diverse slate of employees in selecting your candidates. Giving opportunities to employees to participate in the recruitment process means you're really hearing from all perspectives. Many of us also deal with search firms. If you're dealing with search firms on your candidate or board searches today, insist that they produce a diverse and balanced slate of candidates. Number 3, top leaders need to visibly champion this change. I often say that if you want to know what's important in a company, just follow the money. Well, if you want to know what is important in this realm or how committed an organization is to equity, diversity, and inclusion, tune into the language of leadership. What are they talking about? What are they amplifying? And where are they silent? If top leaders aren't talking about this, then their silence sends a very strong message. It's my hope, my belief that gender parity and increased inclusion is possible. We just need the collective will to achieve it, and HR professionals can help. Never forget that we are humans first, resources second. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louise. That's wonderful. What a great way to end the presentation too. I should also, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, and I did mention it earlier in today's event, but Louise, Paulette, and Caroline were all members of our advisory board when we came up with the Women Lead Here initiative late last year. And we are once again extremely grateful and appreciative for their support in that. All right, now up to number 4. We're so excited to have Hadiya Rodriguez here with us today, who you may recognize as the author of the viral essay, Black on Bay Street, which was published in the Globe and Mail in 2017. Hadiya is a lawyer, a journalist, and a diversity inclusion advocate. You may also have seen this past weekend, Hadiya's most recent piece for the Globe, which was called, Can I Be a Black Mother in a World So Dangerous to Black Children? I highly, highly recommend you read that if you haven't done so already, but judging from our numbers, most of you have. It's a very, very, very important conversation. So her talk today examines how we can revamp the systems of employee evaluations, a really important part of the whole equation that we're talking about here, as well as work allocation in order to set women up for success. So please welcome Hadiya Rodriguez. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Hadiya, you're on mute.
This was bound to happen to somebody. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here. And so I am trained as a lawyer. And for the past 20 years, graduation rates from law school have been about 50% women and 50% men, roughly equal. But if you look at the top of any large Bay Street firm, you see a very different picture. You see very different numbers. And when you start with relatively equal representation and end up with the majority of white men at the top, it does not mean that they are smarter and more capable. If this was true, we would expect to see this kind of dominating performance in professional school, in undergrad, in rates of university attendance, and rather we actually see the opposite. Women outperform men on university dean's lists repeatedly at rates of 2 to 1. What it usually means is we have a system that rewards maleness, whiteness, and fatherhood, and that all talent is not being recognized in the same way. We often miss this inequity because it's systemic. It's hidden in our organizational processes and implicit norms. It's masked in the way we structure and do things. And I want to talk specifically about 2 of the processes within these systems, evaluations and work allocations, and the way in which one particular bias pattern tends to creep in. So that bias pattern is what some like to call prove it again bias. And that's where certain groups are stereotyped as less competent, women, people of color, people with disabilities, etc. And this can manifest in a number of insidious ways in evaluation and work allocation processes. One way it manifests is in performance versus potential. So you've heard, 2 people have accomplished the same tasks in their past work at similar levels of performance. But you hear being spoken about the man, oh, he'll crush it. He'll crush this new assignment versus she's not ready. So often prove it again groups are judged on performance and others are judged on potential. And they have to repeatedly prove themselves in performance before being given promotion or work opportunities, whereas others get those opportunities sooner. We see this manifest in who gets office housework and routine work versus who gets the glamour work or the high visibility work. There's research that shows that more than 80% of white men, but only 53% of women of color, 59% of white women, and 63% of men of color reported the same access to desirable assignments as their colleagues. So again, the same thing, he'll crush it. She's not ready for that type of high visibility work. We see this in the attribution of success to skill versus luck. He's skilled, she's lucky. The Prove It Again group's successes are attributed to luck, happenstance, chance, whereas the majority men's successes are attributed to skill. And then finally, looking at the judgment of mistakes. So mistakes, oh, they could happen to anybody when they happen to people in the majority, or versus she blew it. So people in the Prove It Again group's mistakes tend to be noticed more, remembered longer, and whereas the majority men's mistakes tend to be written off. There's one study that observed a number of consulting firm interviews, and where the white man made a math mistake, it was just, oh, they just missed a zero, it's just a rounding error, not a big deal. But when that mistake was made by a woman or person of color, all of a sudden it was used as something to stop them from going to the next round. So how do we address this? I like to recommend a 3-step iterative process: metrics, interrupting bias, assess and repeat. So thinking about metrics, do your performance evaluations show consistently higher ratings for majority men than for women, people of color, or other relevant groups? Do women's ratings fall after they have children? Do employees' ratings fall after they take parental leave or adopt flexible work arrangements? Do the same performance ratings result in different promotion or compensation rates for women and men? What language is being used to describe women and men? If you see that you have mostly men at the top of your organization and you are trying to get women to the next rank into leadership positions, and you don't know what happens to their ratings after they take maternity leave, how can I take you seriously in thinking that you are trying to address gender balance when we knew a huge part of it is maternal bias in the workplace? So if you don't know these basic numbers, you're really not in a position to change those numbers. Again, we don't change what we don't measure, making sure you are taking those measurements. Interrupting bias. So are you establishing clear criteria for assessment? Are you beginning with clear and specific performance criteria directly related to the job requirements? Is someone able to just write, he writes well on a performance evaluation? Or are they forced to write things like, he is able to write an effective summary judgment motion under strict deadlines? Giving evidence from the evaluation period to explain and back up your rating. So instead of just saying she's quick on her feet, you have to give tangible evidence of someone's skills. It does not allow people to fall into those traps of relying on what they think about a person versus the actual evidence. A really big part is considering performance and potential separately for each candidate. We have seen that this is a problem, and you want to make sure that you're separating the two. And then finally, separating personality issues from skill sets from candidates, making sure that personality traits are judged separately from the work that someone does. When it comes to work allocation, making sure you're formalizing the pools, that everybody's getting equal opportunities, and having accountability for managers who do not give work in an equal way. And then repeat as needed. Return to your metrics. Did the interruptions produce any change? If not, implement a stronger bias interrupter and keep using that iterative process until your metrics improve. And then just last question I'll leave with you. Why would you want to let bias keep you from getting the best candidates and promoting the best people? What is in it for you and your organization to not have women at the top? What is the benefit to you of not recognizing talent, of ignoring potential and promise? How does this help you? How does this help your organization? Insane.
That's wonderful, Hadiya. Thank you so much. And what a great guiding question. You know, I think that you could probably apply it to any decision when it comes to the people that you are advancing within your organization. So thank you for that. So last in our talks, but certainly not least, it's my privilege to introduce Rahul Bhardwaj, who is President and CEO of the Institute of Corporate Directors. The ICD is a national, not-for-profit organization that has more than 15,000 members and acts as the voice of Canadian directors and boards while providing education and governance resources to strengthen director performance. Rahul's talk today is about building gender diversity into the DNA of organizations and how companies can move from their basic compliance stage to ensure that gender diversity becomes part of their corporate culture, becomes really embedded in the organization. So please join me in welcoming Rahul Bhardwaj.
Great, thank you very much, Deborah. Great to be here, and some wonderful comments preceding me. Going last is difficult because I don't want to repeat what we've already heard, but what I'm going to try to do is amplify some of the themes that we've heard a little bit today. And this is going to be based on my experience over the last 25 years of building cultures and working with in the space of diversity and inclusion. But I want to start a little bit by thinking about, why diversity matters and the conversation and how it's evolved. And my recollection is at the very beginning, we really had a conversation that started with equity, the very concept of fairness. Why wasn't there gender and broader diversity in organizations and boards? And it was based on the notion of fairness in many ways, or at least equal access to opportunities. And we know that that had limited success. Over time, we've seen that evolve into what we're calling euphemistically the business case for diversity. And we've heard a lot of comments around that today. Everything from, well, it reduces risk and it reduces groupthink, whether that's at a senior management level or on a board, and there's research to support that. And as many of you have heard me argue for a while, diversity is a real driver of innovation as well. So given all of that, you would have thought that we would have made more progress than we have. So limited success, which is why today my theme is, in fact, moving from compliance to culture and really driving diversity and inclusion. But, I hate to be the governance geek and the process person to say that the reason I'm stating it like that is that it's really important to start with compliance if you have any hope of actually getting to changing the culture. And in my experience, what we've been seeing is often people making very persuasive cases for the change, the merits of diversity, the merits of changing the culture, and they're all right, and they're all well-grounded. But the chances or the opportunities to actually make a move there, I've seen the success takes place when, as you've heard a little bit earlier, you've got policy that's really driving that. And the reason for that, and I'm going to use an example, in fact, if you've seen the CBCA, many of you are aware of the Canadian Business Corporations Act. There's a very significant amendment that took place this year, and it's around diversity and inclusion, not only on senior management, but on boards. It's a comply or explain regime, which is a quintessentially Canadian way of approaching issues, big issues like this. And it's essentially saying that companies, particularly public companies under the CBCA, need to have policies around diversity and inclusion. They need to comply with that or explain why they're not. Now, the importance of something like that is where there's not a conversation before, now a conversation is actually starting to get built into the tissue, the muscle, the fiber of an organization. And in fact, at the ICD, we created something called the Board Diversity Toolkit. So you can go onto our website, it's free to the public and everybody, and you can actually see a policy that you can actually put targets into, you can print it out, and this is something that's ready for a corporate secretary to take to their governance committee to say, let's have a conversation about how we can advance board and senior management diversity. Now, it's more than just a piece of paper, and that's the point that I really want to emphasize. And moving from compliance to culture, why is it so important to have a policy? Absolutely, tone at the top, important for culture, but even more so. In the absence of a policy, you're going to get same old. You're going to get a lot of very good intention and very good people trying to move the dial, but the moment it becomes a policy, it is now going to drive strategy. It's a part of corporate strategy now. And the important part there is that over time, incentives are going to start to get aligned to that as well. So I think that there's a really good opportunity now to move this into a cultural space. And let me just make a little bit of a comment about culture too. Much as the initial conversation around diversity was loosely equity or fairness or opportunity versus the drivers of the business case, when we're talking about culture, a lot of people that would like to see diversity advanced, and for very good reason, they want to know they're going to be in a safe, a welcoming environment, and one that they feel valued and they've actually got an opportunity and a fair shot to advancement. That's a great perspective on culture. But when you look at culture from a board and a leadership perspective as well, there's very much the notion that culture has to drive strategy. So that needs to be aligned, and boards have oversight of strategy. Extremely important, because once that policy gets in place, now you're starting to talk about the space of KPIs and incentives. And that's what really gets built into the long-term DNA of an organization. So as much as I want to support all the inspirational and evidentiary reasons to drive diversity, many of that you've heard today, I hate to be the guy that says a part of it's really important about process, that if you want to drive culture, you should be thinking about starting by driving compliance. I'm looking forward to our conversation today, Deborah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Rahul, and thank you very much to all the presenters today. I'm going to get into a few questions that I've just been kind of furiously jotting down as you've been talking. I just want to flag, if any of you in the audience have specific questions for the group as a whole or individuals, please do submit them using the Ask Question button, which should be right down there. Sorry, the camera's reversed. I can't quite get my directional bearing straight on that. Which will go to our moderation team, and we will do our best to accommodate as many as possible. Just going down the line, I had a few kind of follow-up questions. And Paulette, my first question is for you, and thank you again so much for sharing that link to the form that we can all fill out to inform our representatives of our desire to start to change some of these inequities when it comes to things especially related to childcare and other related issues. I know that, and I hate to generalize on this, but I know that quite often a lot of change that has come to the benefit of women and women identifying individuals has come through the grassroots. And I'm wondering if you have any advice for some grassroots changes or kind of local changes, aside from, of course, signing and submitting the form on your website. Are there any kind of grassroots initiatives that those watching today can start to enact to kind of get this on the radar of governments and make it less of a talking point and more of something that actually changes?
And, you know, as we talk about the importance of childcare, it has been a national conversation in this country for decades, and how important it is. We almost had a national childcare system a few years ago, if you may recall. And so it's been a bit of a political football by different governments. But I would also say that very much childcare has come from the grassroots. The advocacy around having a childcare program or a childcare system that is national has come from the grassroots. And so that's why we feel that perhaps we're on the verge of something different now. And now that we have an economy that clearly depends on half of its workforce, generally being able to contribute to the recovery or the she-covery, as others are saying, is critical. And so I'm not quite sure that it's the grassroots that needs to respond, because we've always been there and done that. I think it's that we need folks in other sectors to actually step up and say, this is important. And it's not just about one sector of our workforce. It's about the entire workforce in Canada. It's about families. It's about, it clearly impacts women more than men. But I would say that it's the corporate sector depends on it. I would say the public sector depends on it. I would say that society depends on having a responsive, affordable, accessible childcare system right now.
Great, that's wonderful, and I couldn't agree more for a million reasons. If there is one kind of silver lining of the situation we're in now, perhaps too, this issue might be a lot more relevant for people who may not have been paying attention as much as they might have been otherwise before. Caroline, I have a question for you to follow up, and I would love to hear the example. I loved to hear the example you had of the work that you've done with Girl Scouts of America. My question for you is what advice would you have about getting an organization that's very large and very complicated and with tremendous complexity within both its external operations and its internal operations, something as big as a behemoth as the Girl Scouts? How do you get something like this on their radar and to get them to put their money where their mouth is?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, Deborah. Put your money where your mouth is. You know, all organizations these days are talking. They're all very vocal. Black Lives Matter, female leadership. Yet, if you look in terms of their, their population, their employee population, where are the women? They're sometimes half of the company, but where? In entry-level roles. So I think it's essential that things become very concrete, and employees can actually demand that. So an organization saying that we're doing the right thing, we're fine, is not enough. I think you sincerely need to, first of all, ask for support, be very humble in terms of your accomplishments. There's three types of corporations that we come across. There are those that say, oh, no, we're doing so well, we absolutely need nothing. And then when we convince them to come on board, they're enrolled, there are so many things that they had never done before that they do for the first time. So all of a sudden, they realize that they thought they had crossed all their T's and dotted all their I's, but there are many more initiatives that they can put in place to close the gender gap in the workplace. Then there are those at the bottom of the pack that say, the opposite. They say, oh, we are in a male-dominated industry. It's impossible for us to recruit women. It's difficult. There's no point for us to enroll in the certification because we are so behind. So let us work on it on our own, and then we'll figure it out. That is also wrong, because actually you are the ones who need the most help. You're the ones who need to open your kimono and say, well, here, this is the situation. We're not doing great. What should we do differently? And then there's the group in the middle that is doing stuff, but not yet progressing at the pace that they would want to. So I think transparency is key. Being open to having someone critique what you've done, give you recommendations, benchmarking, best practices, and be very vocal about it internally and externally. Reap the benefits from the branding and the marketing around this, because employees in the organization, even in male-dominated industries, if they look at the top of the organization and they see there's progress, they see that women are being mentored, they're being sponsored, they're advancing, it is going to give them more appetite to stay within the organization and advance their own career. And I'll give you a quick example, and that's Rolls-Royce. And I'm only sharing this because they gave me the permission. But Rolls-Royce is an organization that wasn't even successful in the bronze level. We're from bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. We've got 4 different levels, and Rolls-Royce didn't even make it to the bronze level. But they communicated about it anyway. They said, listen, we manufacture airplane engines. It's very hard to find women in our industry, but we have decided that we wanted to do something about it, not just words. So I think being very deliberate, very concrete, very transparent, setting objectives, reporting back, following year after year your progress, not just doing it 1 year and saying, oh, okay, here's where we're at. No, and today's platinum is not tomorrow's platinum. We keep upping the bar, and corporations need to do the same internally as well.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I truly think there's some great value in organizations who aren't where they need to be and are even doing very, very poorly in admitting that, because several people earlier today have mentioned you can't change what you don't measure, and I think you have to acknowledge where you are if you're gonna make any progress on that front. So thank you very much, Caroline. Louise, I have a question for you, and it's actually very similar to one we have from someone in the audience, Marianne. So Marianne, wherever you are, thank you for your question. So it has to do with the specific role of HR in driving changes within these organizations, specifically when it is a more hierarchical organization. And I think most of the people in the audience here today are generally on board and understand the case for this, but that's sadly not true across all organizations everywhere. And we do have quite a lot of HR professionals in the audience today. So I'm wondering if you can offer any advice for what they can do as HR professionals when leaders elsewhere in the organization, just for lack of a better term, don't get it, or maybe actively unwilling to advance gender parity.
Thanks for the question. I certainly think that one of the things I know HR professionals are usually quite good at is surveying the sort of internal landscape of the organization, getting a real sense of the organization's culture, using data and analytics that come from all of our people metrics to really understand what's going on in the organization. That said, data alone won't translate to change. It really comes down to the currency of relationships and influence. And I think, you know, I commented it earlier about the importance of having policies and the appropriate policy frameworks in your organization. So when you look at some of the things like your talent succession pipeline depth, you know, you really do have to start exploring some of those metrics to know what is the composition of the pipeline. You can't accelerate people if, in fact, you don't even know what the demographic composition is. So I think so much of it has to do with policy. Setting policy aside, though, you've got to be credible and have influence in your organization to affect change. And Rahul was quite right in talking about, you know, we've been talking about the business case for diversity and inclusion for a long time. And it's time now to really enact what we know to be the best practices. So things like flex programs in the workplace, letting employees have more say in the design of how their work is performed. Of course, that's not true in every industry sector. It's not available to everyone, but certainly we can introduce, and we've proven certainly over the pandemic period, that people can work remotely very effectively and be very productive. So we really need to look at all of our policies and our programs that are getting in the way of real access to equity and inclusion. And so I think about things like maternity leave top-up policies. If you want your female employees to come back to work after taking a maternity leave, you should be creating incentives for them to do so, keeping them connected while they're away from work, providing flexibility around childcare. But also this whole notion of diversity and inclusion starting at the top. It really does have to be a tone from the board throughout the rest of the organization. But I think there's real momentum to employee advocacy. And it's the kind of internal demand that we're seeing from different generations in the workforce now that are making the choices of the kind of organizations they're going to work for on the basis of the company's performance, of course, but also its social perspectives and how it engages with its workforce population. So, you know, people have the choice in many respects to go and work for an organization that is consistent with their own values, but where the organization lives its values with the practices and policies it puts in place. So I would say HR needs to be way more courageous, way more vocal, hold leaders and the organization accountable for what we're delivering in terms of parity and inclusion, and create those dashboards and the visibility around what real performance in the organization looks like.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much, Louise. Hadiya, one question for you, and I was fascinated to hear, I was furiously scribbling so much of the data that you were sharing in your presentation. It's compelling, it's disheartening, but it's also very good to know. I am wondering if you can provide any insight or thoughts on how everything you were talking about in terms of metrics and leaders working to interrupt bias and the importance of that work, how is that affected in the current situation when so many people leaders and managers are leading distributed workforces, either temporarily or partially or possibly permanently in a lot of cases? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on how that kind of evaluative process and the kind of data points that you were speaking to earlier are affected by pandemic life, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the actual metrics you collect won't be that different. I mean, you're still going to, if you have a sales force, you're still going to be able to assess who's selling and who's not selling. Mm-hmm. Or if you have some other metrics that people have to hit for performance bonuses, you're still going to know whether or not they hit them. You may have to adjust them in the pandemic because they just might not be realistic anymore, given the fact that people are at home. But you also can use these metrics to see, you know, are women at your organization being more affected by the current situation? Are their numbers dropping now because of the pandemic? And what are you doing in response to that? So metrics are just going to help you see what's there. You don't know what's there if you're not looking, if you're not measuring. And so you're just going to have to use metrics in maybe some slightly different ways than you might have. But when it comes to still promoting people and deciding who gets work, those metrics really aren't going to change in this current situation.
Thank you very much. That's great. And finally, one final follow-up, not finally, but for Rahul, I was really on board with what you were saying about moving from compliance into culture and making that shift and evolution. Without putting you on the spot to mention any one specific organization or company that you're familiar with, I'm wondering if you can share an example of what that looks like and how it benefits an organization when it stops being, a policy and starts to become something that's really in the DNA. And again, you don't have to mention any names, but it would just be interesting to see what that looks like practically and how it benefits the organization.
Sure. Well, it's a difficult question to answer in one respect because it manifests itself in different contexts all the time. But maybe one way to look at this is to build off the metrics and the KPI discussion that we're having, which is really important to this. But some folks will look at that and think that that's the end of the journey. And what I would suggest is the companies that have done this right know the difference between outputs and outcomes. So you can have all of the, good progress on metrics and KPIs and see those as outputs, and that's a good journey. But the really good companies that I've seen are the ones where leadership is committed through their actions, their language, and they're committed in a way that doesn't say we've got all the answers to how we actually approach diversity and inclusion. But that's one of the outcomes we want. We've got the values built into the organization that do that. And to some of the earlier points, they engage the employee base on developing the solutions that work in that context. So it's not just tick the box, what do the metrics look like today? Because that might give you some nice numbers on diversity, but that can change at any given time as well. I think what you want to do is you want to really be aiming at outcomes, and those outcomes become a part of the culture and the values of the organization. And I think it's a learning journey for everybody, and it's different in every context.
Great, thank you so much. And we have some wonderful questions coming in from the audience. We're running very short of time, and I could talk to you all about this all day. I'm going to table one, and I'll ask you if you would like to answer it, to perhaps try to keep your response maybe to 30 seconds or so we can move in or move on. But the question is from an unnamed viewer, that how do we ensure that women aren't just promoted, but are also sustainably supported after a promotion in order to be set up for success? In other words, we've heard in recent years about the glass cliff, women taking on leadership roles in the midst of a crisis, only to oversee a sinking ship. I think that's something that is definitely top of mind right now. And I'm wondering if any of you can offer any brief advice on how to avoid glass cliff scenarios. If you'd like to speak, just put up your hand and I'll call on you. Caroline.
Yeah, well, I think that the glass cliff phenomenon is very real. We've been seeing it multiple times and recently again. I think that mentoring and sponsoring continue to be key to maintaining women in stretched positions, let's say. We've too often seen women being put at the helm of a plane that was already diving towards its loss. So if we are able to have sort of a web of influence around that woman that we're putting in a powerful position and ensuring that she can have all the support that she needs to move on. But I also want to share a quote from the late French philosopher, her name escapes me, but she used to say that we will reach equality the day that an incompetent woman will be nominated in an important role. I thought it was important for me to share that. So definitely, to me, mentoring remains to be the main focus. Training programs. I mean, the ICD has a great governance training program. Women in Governance has one as well. Making sure that women are always at the top of their game, but also making sure that they've got all their around them, there's no unconscious bias. Too often, and Hadiya mentioned that as well, we will tend to judge all women based on one woman's potential mistake or failure. And that really needs to stop. If we can have male champions supporting that as well, which I think we do in many corporations, that'll help everyone.
Okay. Yes, briefly, Hadiya, yes, please.
Yeah, I would say two things. I would say stop putting women only in the sinking ship positions and putting them on the planes that are ascending into the air. I would say, secondly, ask the women what they need for support. So many times we assume what someone needs for support instead of actually asking them what they need. And then also asking men who have ascended to that position what supports they were given and making sure that those are given to the women as well.
Excellent, excellent. And I'm going to move on to my final question, just in the interest of time. And again, I will ask all our wonderful panelists to please, we'll keep our responses brief so we can get out of here on time and not encroach on anyone's weekend, which I would be loath to do. I have challenged each of you to give our audience, I almost said readers, but our audience today, a clear takeaway, one thing that they can change today to improve gender equity in their organization. Now, it can be something really big, it can be something really small, but the idea is that they can leave right now and make a change for the positive. So I think we'll go backwards this time, and we'll start, Rahul, with you. Would you have anything that you would want to share?
Sure. At the risk of being repetitive here, I'd say show me the policy. I mean, there are a lot of things that people want to do, but you know what? Show me the policy, and then you know you're going to be on the right track.
Okay, and Hadiya, back to you.
I'd like organizations to look at their last 5 years of performance reviews and look at the words that are used to describe different groups, men and women, people of color versus people, white individuals, and then men of color, women of color, white men and white women. Look at the words you are using to describe the same behavior for different groups.
Words matter. Amazing. Yeah. Excellent. Louise.
I think one takeaway I would just encourage people to think about doing is sort of chronic listening. If you really want to know what the sentiment is in your organization, you need to talk to your employees and you need to talk to your customers. So make a commitment to invite 5 employees to a virtual coffee chat. Reach out to 5 of your customers and ask them how you're doing in terms of their experience, lived experience or perspective with gender parity, inclusion, and equity. They will tell you if you ask.
Wonderful. Great. Caroline.
I would say positive discrimination. If you actually want to make a difference in terms of the number of women that you're attracting, retaining, promoting, well, you have to make it clear, you have to make it very deliberate. And also in terms of all your internal and external communications, do we see the women? Do we see the people of color? Do people from underrepresented groups feel like they would belong in your organization? Because at the end of the day, diversity is a fact and inclusion is a choice.
Wonderful. And finally, over to you, Paulette.
Yes. So I would actually bring together board, senior leadership team, take a look at who's in the room and who's not. Because that's the result that you have from what you've been doing. And if you want to actually have results, then maybe tie performance and raises to people's ability to actually change that outcome.
Wow, wonderful, wonderful. Again, I had to resist the urge to furiously take notes throughout that. I'm going to go back to the tape for sure on that one. Thank you so much. I wish we had more time to speak with all of you. Thank you to Paulette Senior, Caroline Kodzi, Louise Taylor-Green, Hadiya Rodriguez, and Rahul Bhardwaj. We are so grateful that you made the time today and shared your wonderful ideas and experiences with us. Thanks again. So as we wrap up, we're nearing the end of today's event, and I'm so energized and excited by everything we've learned. I'm having difficulty focusing on my notes. This is really great. As we wrap up today, okay, I do have 2 pieces of housekeeping. So in about a week or so, you will receive an email. It'll contain a link to today's recording of the event, so you can go back and revisit it if you like. And I presume a lot of you will be doing that. You will also receive in your inbox a survey about today's event. This is very helpful to us. We have pivoted our entire event strategy to virtual, and we are learning as we go, and we're committed to acting on the feedback that we get. So please, if you have a moment, it would be very helpful to our team if you were to do that. I need to thank all of our panelists today and our moderators, my colleagues Rita Treacher and Stephanie Chan, for their excellent job earlier in the program. Wonderful work and great conversations. Definitely need to thank my unflappable colleagues in the Globe Events team. They're going to hate that I call them out by name, but I'm going to do it anyways, because a lot of people don't realize that putting on a virtual event is as much work, if not more so, than an in real life one, IRL, as the kids say. So thank you to Lisa Wickman, Kate Wilkinson, Debbie Gaudet, Jennifer Trin, Shelby Lenetsky, Andrea Ozretek, Amy Nelson, Jackie Keevy, Lindsay Lowy, and the great Trish Bunnett. If I forgot any of you, I am so sorry, but you deserve a round of applause for the work you've done to bring this to life over the past several months and to pivot the event too. One thing I didn't mention earlier is this was supposed to be an in real life event in March, and we've had to build the plane as we've been flying it throughout the summer, and they've done a wonderful job. Also, of course, very importantly, need to thank today's sponsors once again. Again, their support has been instrumental as we've changed the event, and they were totally on board, and we couldn't be more grateful for their support. So thanks to our gold sponsors, CPP, Investments, and Citi, to our supporting partner, Colliers International, to our Report on Business Magazine Academic Advisory Board, the Haskayne School of Business at University of Calgary, and the Smith School of Business at Queen's University. Thank you so much. And to our brand partners, Cogeco, Dream, First Capital, Genworth Canada, Hudson's Bay, Prairie Sky Royalty, Seven Generations Energy, Rotman, and Tri-Summit Utilities. Finally, to you, I can't see your faces, everyone in the audience right now, but thank you to you for making making time today to be part of this important conversation. Whether you were here for all or part of it, we're really grateful. We know your time is valuable, and we all spend a lot of time on screens today. We hope, or these days, we hope this was worth the privilege of your time, as they say. So, my final challenge to you in the audience is one that I'm going to put my money where my mouth is too. I asked our speakers a few moments ago to share one actionable change that they recommend we do as we leave today. Mine, I mean, I've been jotting down notes all day and I have several, but one thing I am going to do echoes what our panelist Jody Kovitz said earlier today about committing to going out of my way to helping somebody in my network, to go out to help somebody who I might be in a position to help with, and to see about doing that in an authentic and valuable way. So this is my public commitment to do so right now. If you have any commitments that you would like to make in your own life or in your own work, please, you can, if you feel compelled, share them on social. We'd love to see what they are. Again, the hashtag is ROB, Women Lead Here. We would love to see that, and hopefully we can all leave with a little bit of wind in our sails. There was a lot of talk today about the disheartening trend line and progress towards gender parity being eliminated or just greatly reduced in the pandemic. The work that we're all doing can be tiring and it can all feel very exhaustive, but I, for one, feel very energized by what we've heard today, and I feel like we can make the change we need to. So thank you all. This is an ongoing conversation. We'll be back again with our second Women Lead Here Summit in the spring of 2020. More on that to come, but in the meantime, thanks again to everyone and have a wonderful weekend. Signing off.